Why, hello, Grand Rising, or good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you come across this. Hello, I'm very excited for this third episode on kids' health with friend Lawrence August. Lawrence has been into the holistic health and nutrition for children and families for a couple decades, more than 20 years. I've known you more than 20 years. You've been into this subject for as long as I've known you. And we're going to hit some heavier topics today that I think are incredibly important to talk about. And we're going to be talking about childhood obesity. And with that, Lawrence, why don't you just take it off? There's a lot to say.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. Good to be back again for show number 3. We're cranking them out here. Yeah, so as far as my involvement directly with childhood obesity, this goes back to 2007. So about 15 years, but obviously in health and nutrition going back into the 90s. I'm kind of dating myself, I guess. And so it's interesting. What we really want to be talking about this week is the news from the American Association of Pediatrics. They just issued some new guidance for how to handle childhood obesity. Oddly enough, the last guidance that was issued, the last paper that they did was in 2007. So it's been 15 years.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's been some time. To summarize, basically, they are no longer recommending what is called watchful waiting. Now, watchful waiting is exactly how it sounds. It's kind of this idea that you sort of sit back and you watch and you wait before you actually make an attempt at some sort of a treatment. Basically, things like they'll grow out of it, right?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Right. So watchful waiting was always the way. It's like, let's watch and see. Very kind of conservative approach. That has changed because what they found is watchful waiting doesn't really work. And I would agree with that, right? You need to sort of intervene early.
Mm-hmm.
The solution that they're proposing, which is sort of unprecedented, is really an approach where medications such as drugs and even potentially surgeries might be appropriate. So we can, I mean, that's sort of the starting point. Just to give you an idea where we're at with childhood obesity, we're now at 1 in 5 children in America.
I didn't know that.
So in the last, few years with pandemic, that's gone up. I think it was maybe 17, 18% at the start of pandemic, and now we're at basically 1 in 5, 20% and rising. So,
jeez.
Yeah, and if there are questions on that, otherwise I can continue on some of the details of what.
Yes, I'm into the details because I want to get into
Yeah. So to give an idea, let's talk about these medications. And so,
yeah, please.
The medications have become very popular. Sort of TikTok has taken over with some of these. Celebrities are using this particular class of drugs. They're called GLP-1 agonists, glucagon-like peptide-1 agonists. Sounds fancy, but these GLP-1 agonists, and agonist is it kind of acts as if it mimics a hormone called glucagon-like peptide in our body, from a class of hormones called incretin hormones. And these hormones actually have very, powerful effects. They help to reduce appetite. They help to delay gastric emptying, and they work on signals in the brain in the hypothalamus to tell us that we're satiated, that we're full. So now, ordinarily, we can get into food in a bit of how that works, but with the drugs, and these are injections that you do once weekly. You're essentially mimicking that, and what does that do? It reduces the appetite dramatically.
But then it becomes reliant, right? And you just screw up your whole system.
Well, yeah, you are reliant. Yes, you definitely are reliant. When you discontinue the medication, you erase the benefit. So this is something that you potentially have to just kind of remain on.
Oh my gosh.
Now, let's sort of get into the nuance of it. The sort of argument in favor of these is obviously there are children that are suffering with, there's morbidly obese children. There are some rare cases where, dramatic like lifestyle interventions and these things just simply don't work. So the argument is that all of the benefits of losing weight, because, when you do get a child back to a healthy weight, other health measurements improve, better blood
Yes.
pressure, better lipids, all of these things do improve. That does happen. But again, they are subjugated to being on this medication basically for life. When you go off of them, if you aren't really locked into diet and lifestyle to maintain, yes, the weight will come back. So are there cases where I feel like it might be needed? Potentially. Now, in the guidelines, the other sort of pushback is, well, so I look at it like this. Americans, we read headlines. We don't read guidelines.
Uh-huh.
Now, in the guidelines, in the official guidelines, yes, they cover the bases. They talk about aggressive nutrition, lifestyle approaches, providing the resources, the counseling, on and on and on. That's all on the books.
Okay.
However, a lot of these things have been on the books for decades.
Yeah. But the headlines are alarming.
The headlines are,
like,
these are the drugs, the surgeries, right?
Yeah.
And what that creates is we see that these drugs work really well. We'll get into the side effects also, but what we're having though now is going to be a clamoring for these medications. And when you talk about nutrition and lifestyle interventions, there's a lot of gray area to that because you're talking about compliance. Okay, we kind of understand human nature. There's a path of least resistance issue going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are some honest attempts, and I would certainly stand behind that. And there are great nutritionists, pat myself on the back, and then there are just sort of people that sort of phone it in. But it's also kind of a two-way street. The parents have to be on board, the child has to be on board.
Yes.
In other words, those nutritional interventions and lifestyle interventions, they're difficult to pull off.
I agree. And they don't always talk about how did they get to this place in the first place. Like you mean like the choices and the food additives and all that. Like they're talking about from here on to make this change, but how do we prevent?
Right.
I know I'm covering a lot of topics with that.
No, exactly. This is a topic that has many, many layers to it.
Yeah.
And so, correct, the environment has changed. And they'll even admit that until we can sort of change the environment, what are we going to do? There's sort of a rule that hunger always wins. It's very difficult to rely on any kind of willpower. So what I will agree, this is not a moral failing, kind of thing with sort of the children. Like when you're in a food environment where food is designed to get you to eat more of it, it's very difficult. So we'll just kind of walk through like the history of man, right? We ate until whatever we could, hunt and gather. That's what we ate, right? That was always the way it was. You eat what you can hunt and gather. And then we moved into agriculture, and it was, you eat what you can farm,
and store for when you don't have,
and store. And then it became, well, you eat what you can buy. And, buying meant going to a store. And now we're at the level of eat what you can buy by pressing a button.
Yes.
Right. So we're just, so the food, not only is the food just easier to access, and we're programmed to kind of eat when the eating's good.
Yes.
But
the media is an emotional, they give you emotional eating through.
The food itself has fundamentally changed. So everything about this is a perfect storm. The food's easier to access. The type of food we're accessing is designed to basically make you want to continue to eat it and eat more of it.
Is that the MSG?
I'll type some additives, but really the combination of, primarily if we look at ultra processed food, is you have a combination of salt, sugar, and fat. You tend to have very low protein in these foods and a high amount of just sort of energy, carbs, sugar, fat, or, all this sort of combined in a very hyper palatable format. So you will overeat. So these medications are kind of hijacking that so that you were feeling like you ate. Now, this is the other issue, is that you're going to be eating less. So from a nutritionist standpoint, then I get concerned with, well, the food that you are taking in has to be really on point.
Yeah.
Because you need a high amount of nutrition.
Yeah, so they don't have much appetite. They'll just grab a bar or something like that.
Whatever it might be. You have to really consider what food is going to be eaten at that point.
Yeah.
So it's the environment is like, it's sort of, we're at this point where, what do we do? The environment is what it is. We're working on changing that. We're a country that has a lot of things that are, legal, that other countries, aren't selling and putting in their foods, different additives, preservatives, dyes, colorings. These are all big issues.
And they're not talked about very much.
They're
not on blast, basically. They're buried.
Yeah, but that's changing. And I think the other thing too, when we get into environment, and I'll just speak on like a recent anecdote. I was looking for stock images for a website I'm helping with, and I was having to look for food images. And it was a pretty long task, and it was several hours. And every 20 minutes, I was getting hungry. And one of the things primarily, it's like when we're just looking at food, I'm looking at pictures of food doing this, and I'm getting hungry. And actually, this is another thing that they're discovering. And so we're in this generation, Pinterest, Instagram, very visual. Kids, teenagers, you're scrolling through, you're seeing food. This is also actually kind of driving our choices.
I can see that.
So we're up against an environment. And so now with the new guidelines in place and watchful waiting sort of going away, yes, they're recommending nutrition and lifestyle interventions, but the way it's going to practically play out, and I've been in this business for a long time, as I believe, and I could be wrong, and maybe we'll revisit this in a year and I'll see if I'm right or not, but I think I'm onto it here. I think we're just going to see an explosion of these interventions. Now, we can get into the cost.
For the medications and the surgeries and things?
These aren't cheap. So you're looking at anywhere from $900 to $1,500 per month without insurance. And then the insurance thing becomes trickier.
Sure.
Well. I mean, that's a whole nightmare in itself. But if you're just talking like out-of-pocket cost, that is what you're looking at. The other issue is these drugs. So, let's break down these GLP-1 drugs. Semaglutide, people pronounce it different ways. I say semaglutide. Semaglutide is this GLP-1 agonist, and these drugs have been used for diabetics. Their ability to control glucose and actually kind of help bump up that initial hit of insulin that diabetics need to sort of maintain good glucose control. That's where they were initially used, but the side effect, if you will, was reduced appetite, and we're finding like they could lose weight. So the word got around quickly. Now we have a lot of diabetics and a lot of pre-diabetics in this country. We have 100 million Americans are either pre-diabetic or diabetic.
Can I, because I've always wanted to ask you this, I wrote this down too, kind of a side note, but when they started mandating all the Macs for school and stuff, I saw an upkick in type 2 diabetes in kids. Do you see a relation to the
I'm seeing some of that. Yeah.
Okay. Because I started watching it, and I'm doc connecting, but some of these parents are just scrambling and feel at a loss, and I'm thinking detox your kid, or it came from.
We don't know, and that's I have seen it, but it's so hard to know what the mechanism is there that is doing that.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, these medications are they're powerful, and so what's happening now is because of the sort of perfect storm of word getting around on TikTok and supply chain issues, which there's a whole other.
I know that's the whole other topic.
We will not talk about today, but supply chain issues, and a surge in demand is diabetics are having a hard time now getting these medications. Essentially, so the drug that's prescribed for diabetes is called Ozempic. The drug that's been approved for weight loss is called Wegovy. The active ingredient is identical. The difference is in the dose of the GLP-1, the semaglutide in those drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So with the case of Ozempic, you'd start at 0.25 milligrams per week. You titrate up to half a milligram, 0.5 milligrams a week, and you sort of stay there. In the case of Wegovy, you're going 0.5, 1.0, 1.7, all the way up to 2.4 megs per week. So you're talking about close to 5 times the amount.
Wow.
But people are just trying to get their hands on whatever they can with these. Anything that has semaglutide right now is in hot demand, especially in our town in Los Angeles.
Okay.
It's a industry thing. Hollywood people, executive, like these kind of.
I think
People
I've
got a lot of
seen
money.
that ad. It's a Kardashian too, right? So they're like, holy
Yeah.
reach.
This is what's happening here, and
Okay.
and it's interesting because there's this kind of lot of demand, and when people kind of want what they can't have, the media is again, and so the media, you have to think about this, is that I get when a pediatrician or physician clinician that they're in favor of these drugs. I get what they're saying. They're saying, look, we need something to help. I get that. And they will say, like, look, the guidelines are still emphasizing, nutrition and food. But the problem is, again, the headlines. Well, if that's the thing that we're really prioritizing, the headline could be simply rewritten. We could rewrite a headline that says, when diet and lifestyle are more enforced than ever before. And in the case that these fail, there are some medications or something that kind of softens it. But no, the splashy headline is the drugs and the surgery. Now, I will say the drugs will probably, because there's sort of a stopgap between nutrition and lifestyle and surgery, you'll probably see less bariatric surgery. But, you're talking about like a 13-year-old, 14-year-old kid getting put on a medication. That's a long time. They got a lot of life ahead of them.
Yeah. A lot of time to make corrections and adjustments. And what is this surgery exactly? Is that like the stomach stapling and stuff, like that kind of surgery? What is the surgery they're pushing?
They sleeve the stomach, or they
Okay.
resection. They bypass and resection. So essentially,
For
just making
children.
a smaller stomach. Well, I think it's approved now for 13 and older now. It's a kid.
Okay.
So if it's teen, 13 or older, and they're at a BMI, body mass index, above the 99.9th percentile, so you have to be significantly overweight, then the surgery might be an option.
Okay. That's like the morbidly obese. That's like
but they're
last
talking
ditch
about,
effort.
they're screening for obesity. Like all these things are fine. Like starting at age 6, screen for obesity. Got it, right? The resources that they talk about, the counseling. The thing is, I've been doing this long enough where I know it's like brochures and PSAs. It's just, there's a lot of money just being to me just thrown into the air. Like it's not working.
Yeah.
That's not working. I mean, even let's just look at the internet. We have more information than ever before. We feel like people need information, education. What they need is a real connection and an experience to, like, knowing what food does, for one, having some hands-on experience with it, learning what nutrients do to their body. Like, I feel like, and that's kind of what I do, right? And I try to do that for families and kids, is walk them through what food does to their body and how to make choices and work with your body.
Right. They need a step-by-step. They need to be handheld and step-by-step supported and go through that.
Correct. Because even simple tips I could give right now to anybody listening, simple, actionable things that you could think of. So if we think about how these hormones work and how these drugs work, well, we can somewhat mimic this in the way that we eat, in terms of just food choices and food pattern, and I'll give you an example. If you have a plate of food and you have a piece of protein, chicken, fish, steak, or tofu, or some beans, some kind of protein source, and you have a carbohydrate on the plate, rice, potato, whatever, and some vegetables, right? Sort of like a balanced plate. For instance, one simple thing to encourage is eating the protein food first. That's like a simple sort of thing to do. Like it could be the same meal. If you consume the carbohydrate first, you're going to get a difference.
The sugar spikes, right? Yeah.
Sugar spikes. When you are taking in protein, certain fats. So this is interesting, right? Mono unsaturated fats like olive oil or things from avocado, or even saturated fat from animal protein sources, right? Those actually have an impact on GLP-1.
Okay.
Oddly enough, your polyunsaturated fats, which are like from like your seed oils, don't.
Oh.
Right? So they're not going to provide that same signaling. So we already know. So things like olive oil, avocado, monounsaturated fats, proteins, right? Those can actually help make you feel fuller longer.
Is that why too they say if you're going to have a carb, put a protein on it? Like when I used to be into bananas until I crashed, but I started adding peanut butter, and then I'm like, oh,
right. You're sort of slowing down the release of sugars and creating more blood sugar stability. But and you can really leverage that. Now, one thing in terms of leverage, that's what they call the protein leverage hypothesis. And what that's showing is that people will eat until they get a certain amount of amino acids in their body, right? So that's why we have these signaling molecules. They're sensitive to that. They see amino acids coming in, and they'll send the signals. They're just saying, "Okay, good. We've got what we want."
But I get so alarmed when I hear there's medication coming out to interfere with that, because won't it shatter that system?
It's not shattering it, but it is doing. There is some fundamental things that it does. Where so when you go off of it, your GLP-1 receptors will still work, right? But one thing that I've recently come across, and I'm not going to speak too detailed on it because I haven't done the deep work research, but it was an interesting phenomenon that these drugs can. So you have like different types of fat cells. You got hypertrophic and hyperplastic. Hypertrophic are large, right? So you have kind of the idea of like a large fat cell, and then you have smaller fat cells. And so these drugs have been shown to basically take a large fat cell and shrink it, but make more.
Okay.
So you've got smaller fat cells now, but you have more of them. Now, under the influence of these drugs and the hormonal setting that these drugs provide, that's good. Like you're very insulin sensitive, everything's good, you're losing weight, appetite's in control. But what's interesting to note is if you go off the drug, the potential now you've got all those fat cells, and those fat cells have a life of about 10 years. Those fat cells now can grow as big as they need to grow. So in a short term, you fixed it. Then you go off the drug and you reintroduce it. Now you have more fat cells. They were smaller, but now they have the potential to now off to the races. So there was actually a headline the other day. Was her name Remy Bader, whatever her name was? She talks about that. It was a headline where I just kind of read it real quickly, but where she got off of one of these GLP-1 drugs and regained double the weight back or whatever that she lost. And her binge eating is worse than ever and all this stuff. So,
oh my gosh, I can be a testament. I tried all the crazy things that would come out. Even I didn't do a fen or whatever, but any weight loss thing, and then you get off and you balloon. Same with drugs, like speedy metabolism kind of drugs. You get off it and you blow up.
Yeah.
It messes with your metabolism, huh?
It's just they do what they do while you're on it, and then when you go off of it, you no longer get it
anymore,
right?
And you never probably fix the initial problem why you need it in the first place.
Now, with also full disclosure, is these drugs do carry a black box warning. A black box warning is the most severe warning a drug could get, and it has to do with the possibility of thyroid cancer. Now, this was shown in mice, but So that is the black box warning.
Mhm.
And so then it's not without that. Now, in terms of the side effects, it's typically like gastrointestinal. So, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. The nausea happens quite frequently. It usually subsides after a few weeks, but not pleasant.
Okay.
But that does subside. And again, there might be cases where these are a really great way to intervene the child with morbid obesity,
To
where you've
kickstart
got to
the
be able to
healing?
kind of get some weight off
Yeah,
fairly quickly.
I understand that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's total unprecedented waters, right? I mean, we've never seen anything like this. Having even children being diagnosed with type 2 obesity is a completely modern phenomenon. That literally zero cases 30,
Right.
40 years ago. Literally none. There was
That's
a
when the
single.
entire family unit has to be looked at. Like, what is the lifestyle at home? Yeah, like there needs to be, yeah, an
Yeah, I
entire.
would imagine like a parent who, if they're frustrated at their wits' end, they might not have the education they need or know how to properly, food, right? Like, certainly aren't learning in school much. Right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, whatever environment whatever they're doing, yeah, that's gonna be kind of brought into the home. And so,
Mhm.
there's so many factors here. It isn't
Yeah.
like, just one thing. There's multiple factors.
Oh, there's so many things. And then you posted something, even just the ingredients, because I think people stopped looking at ingredients because the manufacturers got really fancy with their labeling. So you just see, organic or health. You have to really look at what is in the ingredients. It's almost a
Yeah,
skill kill, I think.
with ingredients and labels, I mean, if you just look at the word organic, uh, that definition has changed and it continues to change through the years. It gets
Yeah.
broader and broader because
Yeah.
there's lobbying that has an interest in getting that definition widened. The wider that definition is, the more foods can fit that definition.
Mhm.
So, it's even for someone like myself, it's hard for me to keep up with, the classifications of what's truly organic and what's
Mhm.
not.
Mhm.
So it is again, it's one of these things where, people like me were never really needed throughout human history. You eat. The idea is like people are going to eat when they're hungry, and they'll eat till they're full.
And they eat with their body, like the nutrients they're needing, right?
Right.
Like,
And
or
and
what's
when
provided in season.
right, and oh, that's a whole other thing too. Of like, that's pretty wild, by the way. Like the time of the year can actually. I was reading some papers this past week on how the time of the year, the season, influences the gut microbiome
Oh, I'm
to
100% with
facilitate
that.
to
Yeah.
facilitate the type of food that would be in season. And so
Yeah.
we have people in Chicago, eating tropical fruit in December. You're eating a mango in December.
It does a
You're talking about
disservice.
there's a
Yeah.
mismatch to the biology, what the biology wants during those
Right.
seasons. That's a very fascinating
It's so
area.
fascinating. Different parts of the world and what grows there. That is what is needed to sustain the lifestyle there. But then, yeah, and that's a whole other topic, maybe. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty
So
fascinating.
we're in this kind of time now where this is really kind of a game changing thing with these new guidelines.
Yeah.
Um, just the again, just the optics of it, just being in the media now, and these drugs being talked about, and they are like the most. I will say this is like if you just look at the studies, like they work better than any weight loss drugs ever. They
Okay.
like they do what they're supposed to do, but there's always a trade off, and all drugs. I always say they don't have side effects; they have effects. There's no such thing as
Uh-huh.
a side effect; it's an
Uh-huh.
effect. But the idea is, are the effects, are the unwanted effects? Are you willing to take on whatever the unwanted effects might be in exchange for the desired effects? What is
Mhm.
that trade-off? Sometimes
Mhm.
that trade-off might be worth it,
I
right?
gotcha. I
It,
gotcha.
it, it might be, but
Mhm.
the big thing is knowing, are you okay? Do you understand that you will be on this medication for the rest of your life if you want the benefits? If you do not want to be on the medication for the rest of your life, do you understand what that's going to mean coming out of this?
Wow.
So I suspect there will be people that, after a while will want to go off.
Right.
So I'm
Especially
suspecting
at that cost.
I'll probably see a lot of business,
Yeah.
to be honest,
Oh
of
my
that
God.
nature, where there's going to be like, help me now that I've gotten off of this to not go back. What do I have to do?
Mm.
But all of that stuff should really happen up front. And again, the guidelines are suggesting that, but there's
You
this
can't
sort of
get to the guidelines because you're stuck at the headline. Yeah.
right. I mean, it's ultimately doctors are human, right? I mean, let's take an example. I'll give an analogy, like ear infections or something, right? A lot of ear infections are viral. But if you got a screaming kid, parents like do something. I was just going to write the script for the antibiotic. I mean, if we look at antibiotic resistance and why that's become such a thing,
Oh yeah, I hate antibiotics.
well, they're powerful drugs.
Yeah.
And if we really look at, pediatrics are one of the big reasons that antibiotic resistance has occurred. That's just the truth because of that. Because it's like, do something, damn it, right?
Yeah, the parent wants
to get out of here. Just give me
Mhm.
something.
Yeah.
And they put the child on the antibiotics. Oh, the ear infection went away. Probably would have went away on its own.
Because it does naturally after a certain
So
period
you'd
of time.
say, oh, the drug did it, but it probably was on its way out alone.
Yeah.
So there's even distinction between, pink eye and conjunctivitis. In the early stages, they look alike. And then as you kind of observe, conjunctivitis is going to present more dramatically. And then, okay, you're going to need an antibiotic. But something like, a viral, infection in the eye isn't going to need that. And, antibiotics were always seen as drugs of last resort, life-saving kind of situation.
And aren't they seen for like bacteria, not viral? Or there's a difference between viral and bacteria?
Right. That's what I'm saying. And so if
Okay.
you've got like a viral infection, an antibiotic's not doing anything for it. A virus it's not going to respond.
Got you.
Now,
But then the parent just wants it over quick, so they
just want
use the
something.
antibiotic, and then their gut health
People have
is
no
jacked.
idea what antibiotics do, honestly. Like they just know, like, put me on one. Okay.
Wait, what'd you say there?
A lot of people don't know what antibiotics are.
Wow.
I'm just saying, like, in my experience of dealing with thousands of people through the years, it's just like an antibiotic's a drug. It works. Well, like, antibiotics are serious.
Yeah.
The really good antibiotics, there's a big price to pay with those. So something like Cipro, right? Cipro is really good because it gets like deep into tissue, so it's really like powerful. But the problem of it is it gets like really deep into tissue, so people can end up having like tendon problems and joint pains, sometimes crippling, like for life. So, in other words, antibiotic, it's like that's just a general term. There needs to be the right antibiotic in the right situation at the right time. We're at the point now where even like the major, the WHO and these, organizations are saying we're sort of out of antibiotics are sort of like we don't know what to do here. We've got a lot of antibiotic resistant bugs now. They've just kind of outsmarted the medications. Penicillin, we're wandering down the road. We'll get back to childhood obesity, but real quick, penicillin, when it came out, fixed everything. Right?
That was the go-to.
99% of infections, penicillin worked. Penicillin doesn't work for anything now. I mean, it's like maybe 0.1% of infections that we'll use penicillin for, but like this is so we're running out of those things. So the new
But would you what are on your because I go the super homeopathic holistic route with antibiotics, isn't it? Like clove, or you just find there's natural.
You can use things like oregano, silver, clove, things that are just kind of natural antimicrobial, natural antibiotic. Yeah.
And you won't develop a resistance to those because it's natural, right?
You won't.
Yeah.
And so, like, even in the case, like, there's a big explosion in what's called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and papers are published where natural herbal antibiotics work just as good as as the prescriptions.
And you probably can't find those on MSN. You have to dig to find those papers and those
Yeah,
articles.
you gotta. I mean, my desktop. I've got hundreds of these papers. So when I'm working with people, I was like, I want to show them the
You need to
papers
show, yeah. I love
so
that you
that
do that. Yeah.
yeah.
And do you have any clients that are on those other GP1, those appetite suppressants things that you?
I have one client. The daughter is on a GLP-1.
Okay.
One. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're
And that
working
was
with her. Uh-huh.
right. Right. Yeah. For the most part, the people, I guess maybe it's just kind of like in the circle that I'm in, and people that recommend me are prone to being people that are saying, can we handle this without doing that?
Gotcha.
Can we kind of take this nutrition approach first and see where that goes?
Gotcha. Mhm.
There's a skill. What we need is there's kind of like great responsibility, right? With all of it, it's like we've got these phones that can do everything, but we have to have a responsibility of our usage, our screen time. That's the thing that I'm really always talking to, and kids really actually understand it, is trade-offs. And okay, it's not that you can't do this or can't do that, but if you do this, this was what will happen. Are you okay with that? Do you understand that? Get them to understand the idea that there's always going to be trade-offs. When you're doing this thing, it means you can't do this thing. Like, you can't. We're in a world now where I think that people are under the impression you can sort of just have it all, and there's no. Again, we used to have to work for food.
Right. They
We
want
had to,
things
like,
done for them.
food was
Mhm.
scarce. Like, you had to invest. When things come easy and there's no investment, there's still a price to pay. Like we don't get away from that. We just trade what that cost is. It used to be the cost was sweat and energy, and right, like you have to go fight for the food, or the gardening or the farming. There's an
Mhm.
investment.
There's an investment and then a satisfaction and a reward when you
A
have the
reward. It's
nutrients.
who you become along the way. We've removed all of those processes. So
Yeah.
from the behavior science standpoint, that's important because you're removing all these steps. So people are going further and further away from what food really is. You could just, again, hit a button, order a DoorDash. It shows up, you're eating. You've missed all of those steps. And what comes easy tends to be valued very low.
Mhm.
That's just the way it works. If it's something harder to obtain, you get that sense of satisfaction. You get that like reward feeling of like you put something into it and you value it because you had
Yeah.
to work for it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's not, if you took the modern food environment and plopped it into 1950, those people in the 50s would be the same thing. We're not like morally different creatures or something, you know what I mean, in a sense of like we're exposed to certain environments, we're acting accordingly. That's why this is so hard.
Yeah.
And I try to tell people, like, it isn't actually your fault that if you eat certain foods and you feel like you can't stop eating them, it's actually showing you that your biology is working the way it should, because
It's
the people that
responding.
made that food are knowing that. They know the key in. It isn't your issue. However, we have to give children a sense of agency and control and power. Empowering a child is actually telling them, like, okay, you can make a choice though for a food that won't make you feel that way. Wouldn't that be cool? That's a power.
Yeah.
Because I get that the pushback nowadays, diet culture, I get it, like it's terrible. But what we have to ask is, why did it occur? Like, diet
Mhm.
culture wouldn't even exist if we didn't have a lot of people wanting to be on a diet or lose weight. Like, it exists because something happened. And what was that thing that happened?
Media?
So,
Mhm.
fast food culture, right?
Okay.
So we're in this situation now where it's like, what? Okay, we're going to run away from diet culture into what? I mean, the fast food companies love that. Yeah,
Oh,
diet
sure.
culture. We don't want diet culture to come over here. It's like, you don't have to do one or the other. The thing is, we're always going to be a part of some culture.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
what is that just what is that culture? What community are we a part of? What values do we have?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, let's attack diet culture all day. I'm all for it. But
Mm-hmm.
the answer isn't Snickers satisfies. Is that the answer, really?
Oh, media.
I mean,
Advertisement media. Have you seen those photos of, I think it was Taste of Chicago, from where we're from, or maybe it was at Venice. I mean, it was just a mass city gathering, and it was like the 70s or 80s, a big photo, and there's a rare obese person in the photo, and it was just a different way of doing things. Then you get introduced to the mass, overproduced foods and competition among foods and packaged foods and on the go and both parents working, and the thing shifted, and now you rarely find a fit person in a photo. I mean,
yeah, you could
it
just
went,
look at the
what?
pictures. I mean, look at the pictures, Heidi, when we were in grade school. I look
I
at my grade
know.
school pictures,
I
and even
know.
the kids that we thought were like the chubby, heavy kids, they looked
There were
like
a couple. There was less than a handful in the school. Yeah.
right. And again, so this is not an issue of we have to look at, like, why are we at this point? Are we? I mean, it feels almost like throwing our hands up in the air as a society, like, okay, okay, just give up. It's like,
Oh
and I'm not wired that way. I
no,
get
me
all the
neither.
sides of this argument, and I'm
Mm.
sympathetic or empathetic to everybody that comes to me with issues. I get the different challenges people are up against. It is not easy. It is not. There are peer pressure, social pressure, advertising, socioeconomic issues. Living in an area where good luck trying to find an apple. I mean, good luck. Like, good luck.
And the
I,
school lunches. I
I get all
mean,
that. And the school lunches, right? So schools have huge responsibility, and then you
major.
get into
And that's
that.
when you guys got to research rainbow chefs. Lawrence
Yes,
is on the board
rainbow
of that.
chef.
They're changing the world. One school
We're
lunch at a
doing
time.
everything we can. Look at
Yeah.
what we're doing with educating, and some of the other organizations. Eat Real is one that I love to shout out. There's a great nonprofit that are working with getting healthier food into schools. Everybody's doing what they can.
Yeah.
There's just a
But
lot of
empowering the kids is important.
there's a lot of entrenched politics in the school systems and things that are just so difficult. And I speak from frustration and experience of just being at this for so long. You have high hopes, but when you realize what you're up against sometimes, here's where this goes into. We've got these public guidelines that come from on high, right? Like, the people have spoke, the experts have spoken, here they are. At some point, we just sort of have to ask ourselves, what, like, who are we trusting with moving this thing forward? Like, at the end of the day, like, you have to take care of your own.
There's still choices you're
because
making.
to feel like, as a parent, like,
Mm-hmm.
or just be quiet and listen to the experts. It's not that they're not experts. It's just like they're expert at a certain thing, and they look at things a certain way. If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Doctors are
Mm-hmm.
really smart people.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked for doctors. Like, they're smart people, but that MD is medical doctor, which means what they learn, and they learn it really well. They learn how to diagnose, and they learn how to prescribe. And you get into this kind of circle where it's like, why do I need this medication? Because you're diabetic. I'm diabetic. Well, why? Because your glucose is high. Well, why? Because you're diabetic. You're in a circle. You're like, okay, but why am I diabetic? Wait,
It's not
well,
solution
hey,
based.
your
It's
A1C is high,
Band-Aid.
your glucose high. Oh, why? Because you're diabetic. Because I diagnosed you. You're trying to kind of get out of that loop of, like, how can I stop this? Like, I have put so many people into remission with type 2 diabetes with pure just diet. Like, I don't need to be convinced at this point. I've been doing this for 25 years. That's where I get kind of feisty about it. Like, I've already
Sure.
seen it happen again and again. I don't need, right?
Yeah, can I get personal too? Didn't you
Sure.
fall into the entire industry because in your teens, didn't you have a weight? You were struggling with your weight when you were young? Was
Well,
that you?
yeah, my own struggles were, I was actually, so in most of growing up, I was actually very skinny,
Okay.
right? And then I had a bad acne problem in high school, which actually was funny enough. That's actually a great story though. I was using everything, the benzoyl peroxide and
Yeah, I did
all the
Accutane.
oh,
That fucked me
that's a
up.
whole thing. That's a
Yeah,
whole
that
thing.
messed me up.
And I never went there, but it was a kid in lunch who was looking at me. And I had it really bad, and he's just staring at me, and I'm like, oh, I know what he's looking at. And he said, you know what'll help that? Just some kid, it's a lunch table. He's like, stop using all these products. Just wash your face with cold water. And I did that, and in about 2 weeks, my skin cleared.
Oh, yes, I know, right? They bombard you with product. Yes.
Literally, that was what worked. Literally, all
Yes.
of the stuff I was buying, Stridex pads and I stopped it, and that was it. And never
Isn't
looked
that funny?
back. I never looked back. Anyway,
It's not. I was gonna say, isn't that funny? But it's not. It's designed that way. Okay, go ahead.
And when I was in college, I gained a lot of weight, and because I'm tall, I'm 6'3", I could sort of hide it well, and but probably about 40 pounds heavier than I am now for a while. Around the age of 19, I was probably the heaviest I've ever been, and so made a lot of changes then, and realized I realized a lot of the things that I'm talking about now, that was certain foods that I was eating were just making me hungry all the time. And we set ourselves up, if we think about it this way, breakfast food.
Ooh.
Right. So breakfast food, waffles and pancakes and toast and sugary cereals, whatever that might be. Spike the blood sugar in the morning, and you're kind of doing this thing through the day. So we're already kind of like there, right? Then you got like going out setting. If you're going to dinner, they bring out the bread first.
So you can
go back to this GLP-1 sequence. I just tell people, look, it doesn't mean that you don't have the bread. It means ask them, could you bring out the bread basket with my meal? Maybe that's what it means. Could you, then you can have some of that protein first, a salad first, and then enjoy a piece of bread. But what happens is they bring the bread out because it's you're going to get hungry. I mean, they even call some of these things appetizers.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you want to keep eating.
Yeah.
So, that's a tip for going out. And another thing is, if you're going to a place where they've got a lot of food, you just simply ask, like, could you bring the to-go container with my food? Then you can portion it out, put it in the to-go container, slide it aside, then it's out of sight, out of mind. Because also what we know is people will sort of eat with our eyes, especially those that have been taught to finish their plate. We'll just sort of, we'll eat until we're full, and then we say, can I have a to-go box? But if we kind of portion it out ahead of time, we're less likely to go into the to-go bag and finish it. It's a human behavior thing. You have to know. So it's like, know thyself.
Yeah.
To teach kids and moms and dads, know about these things so that you set yourself up. You're not walking into traps every single day. You're just going to get trapped every single day.
I know. I'm so glad you brought up the protein first, because I'm going to make my kids watch this segment, because I say that every morning, especially before we go to the center. I'm like, and actually each meal, I'm like, pick your protein, and then we build around that. And so I'm like, I will say, because that was a hard lesson I learned myself. I thought, remember, what's her name? The chick with the short white hair, and she pushed eat bread.
Susan Power.
Yes.
Yeah. She was all about low fat.
Oh my God. Imagine all those poor people that just were spiking left and right, and they couldn't lose the weight, and she got sued.
This is an interesting thing. You can lose, so you can do high carb, low fat. You can lose weight with all these modalities. But the question is, especially around that time when she came out, is some of those fat-free options.
Oh yeah.
Because the thing is, if you're doing this with whole foods, you could pull it off.
Right. But not the packaged stuff.
Doing it with like the Snapwells fat.
I was just thinking Snapwells. That came out at the same time, and my mom was addicted. Yeah.
Oh, it's fat-free. So
I'm like, fat-free, I can eat the whole thing.
Falls in this category, but you end up eating like a whole sleeve of
Yeah.
Snapple, cookies, and you're just like, what just happened?
And they fill it with extra sugar. They just take the fat out, but they put extra sugar. So it's even
Right.
more.
So you got like just enough fat to make it palatable, uh, you know, salt and the sugar. And yeah, so you're
Yeah.
feeling less stable through the day.
Mhm.
Because if you
Mhm.
ate like so it really is about these combinations. So if you eat like a baked potato and it's just plain dry baked potato, you'll fill up. But if you put like a lot of butter on a baked potato and some cheese and it's kind of real yummy, you'll eat through that very easily.
Mhm.
So there's nuance to this. But
Mhm.
if the name of the game of these drugs is to increase satiety, fullness, and delay gastric emptying, if that's what these drugs, that's a big benefit of these drugs in terms of like getting people to lose weight, we should be really enforcing how to eat in a pattern that'll support that
Bingo.
regularly. And if you can do that, you really got it down. You really
I
do have it down.
I love that. And I love that you are somebody and there are more like you that are there to assist people in that. Because I like from coming from myself in my teens and 20s and even early 30s with eating disorders and things, had I been taught the right way to not be afraid of food, the way I was so afraid of it, I had to completely change the pattern. I mean, adding protein, like adding cream cheese or peanut butter to a bagel, are you kidding me? That would have been like I would have gone into like this panic mode, but then I realized how satiated I was, and then I
That's
didn't eat as much.
that's it, and that's where
It's
we
like
get
you have to
into
reprogram.
if you get that kind of education up front, and
Mhm,
people really know how to do it, then you can employ things like intuitive eating and things that you hear about that work.
mhm.
Where intuitive eating and things go sideways is when people don't have that knowledge, and so they kind of take on intuitive eating as this thing of like, well, my body must need these chips, my body must need. But when you do intuitive eating at its best, in my opinion, is when it's informed by what the body needs and go, well, I know my body needs some protein. That's healthy for me. That's empowering. That's okay. That's solid. That's not a. And again, we don't talk about food as moral, like you're a bad person if you eat this, you're a good person you eat this. Food does certain things, and are you willing to take on what those things are when you eat it? Again, this is these trade-offs. You
Mhm.
have to learn this.
Yes, and with
When
as a
you
mom, you
when
make
you
me.
when you can go into that and go, okay, I know, like I'm looking. So if you go to like a buffet, so I'm like a buffet owner's worst nightmare.
Do you remember
I
that
already
salad place?
I'm on to them. Like,
Yeah.
so the left to right, just from cost perspective, the food at the start is like the high margin stuff. That's where they're making the most money, and the food
Okay.
at the end is the lower margin stuff, and it's usually the proteins, like the salmon and the tri-tip. That's like at the end. They want you to
Okay.
fill up on all this other stuff, and then it's like the proteins at the end. I just walk right to the end of and I'm getting all that good stuff first. So when you know that, then you could say like, okay, I'm going to prioritize what my body needs, essential amino acids, because in my opinion, we think of vitamins and minerals. We got vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C. We got minerals, magnesium, zinc, iron. Protein we see as this, it's protein. In my opinion, if they were to ever restructure nutrition facts, we would see the essential amino acids really kind of looked at as like their own thing, because we need those amino acids. People, I need vitamins and minerals. I need protein. Well, yes, you need protein, but you need amino acids. Why
Mhm.
is that important? Because then we have a little more nuance to the choices of protein and quality, and it gets even more refined
Mhm.
when
Mhm.
we choose to nourish our body with the essentials, essential amino acids, essential fatty acids. We get those down, then now we can kind of make choices based on that. We know that we've given our body upfront what it needs. Here's an example of how statistics get all crazy.
Mhm.
Because when I say that people aren't usually eating enough protein, people will push back and say Americans eating more protein than anywhere in the world. But there's a problem with that, and I'll explain why. how many calories is it taking for Americans to get to that number? Because here's what's interesting. The absolute amount of protein eaten by human beings around the world and for decades has been very, very much, it's tight. We're all with it. We all tend to eat about the same amounts of protein. Here's the difference. If you were to go to like a hunter-gatherer situation, and there's still tribes out there that are, primal sort of tribes that we can study still, they're somewhere between like 30 and 35% of their diet is coming from protein. But that percentage means that the absolute amount of protein that they're eating is a greater percentage, but the amount of calories to get there is lower. Gotcha. So we're eating as much protein as them, but we're at about 12%, 13%, because we're eating through carbs and fat to get to those amino acids. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we go, we're eating 100 grams of protein. Right, but we're eating so much more food to get there. So
yeah, I understand.
They do studies what are called like ad libitum, where they let people just choose how much they want to eat. So they do an ad libitum where one group has whole unprocessed food, one group they have access to processed food. And you look at the two groups. After 2 weeks, the processed food group gains weight. They've eaten more calories. But if you look at the absolute amount of protein in both groups, they're about the same.
Huh.
What does that tell you? There's something in us that knows when we get to that level of protein, we're kind of topped off. It's really fascinating. It's
it is. The body knows what's up.
And it's becoming more and more a thing with each study that supports it. So that's important to know. If people knew that, think about how that could change the game.
Well, they're going to know it now.
You're all going to know it now. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I love it. Before I know we're gonna.
This flew by. We're almost at an hour.
I know we're almost at an hour, but we have to pick it up again. But I have to have a funny thought, because as a mom, my little man, and I know this came from me, chips and fries. He loves his chips and fries, and I'm like, we're getting an air fryer so we can make our own chips even and fries, because we're like, it's getting to be like a thing. But I'm always like, where's your protein? Where's your protein with it? So Mr. Crafty got into dipping his stuff in his almond milk, and he's like, I got my protein. I'm chugging my protein. I'm eating my fries. I'm like, oh yes, you're right. Touche, my son. Touche.
Yes. Just exposing children to that idea, and I like to talk about it like a car with a brake pedal. I think we've talked about that before. Where it's like if you get into a car, you want the brake pedal to work well, right? Mm-hmm. And we want our food. When we hop onto the meal, right, we want to know that there's some brakes to it, that it's going to tell us a proper time to stop. When there's certain foods that just don't have a brake pedal, we know about that. We just know that from experience. And so, having those quick protein things like it's sliced turkey or some string cheese or whatever it might be around and available, that's really helpful. That's really helpful to
can reprogram our. Yeah. And then there's the empathy and forgiveness of self, because some of us, when you think, oh, I can't do that, I don't have that, maybe they just haven't been properly taught the right ways to go about it.
That's what it is. So again, I'm with these new guidelines, to just sort of summarize this up, wrap this up in a bow, is that yes, they are still, it's not like they're recommending drugs and surgery as the first line. That's true. They are recommending nutrition and lifestyle intervention and counseling and all of these things that they should. My concern is that, those things aren't like, when you put somebody on a drug, it's like, we know you're on the drug, we know the dose, it's like you can track it really well. In the area of nutrition counseling, which I'm well familiar with, what I do, you are relying on a lot of factors: compliance, reporting, self-reporting. That point where it's like, we've tried this, it doesn't work, is a slippery thing, because some people are genuinely giving that a try. Some people are genuinely getting great help. But sadly, my experience is People are tapping out pretty early when given the thing of like, you can do this. If you've got the money and the resources to do this, we can go to this. I feel like we're just nudging it closer and closer to that truly kind of ending up being the fast tracked thing that they're going to be doing. And again, I support it for certain children, but I am obviously a huge believer in, because again, the trade-offs, you have to think of this. This isn't, it would be different if, you had an injection and you took it one time and it lasted you a year and it was, I mean, it's
gives you a year to like figure out your plan.
But you're getting injections every week.
And there's probably no long-term study. Is there?
It can only be as long as they can be, right?
Yeah, right.
The GLP-1s have been studied for many years,
Okay.
right? So that is actually what is appealing, is they generally do seem to be safe. But again, the thyroid cancer thing, that's a lot of that is, mouse studies, mice aren't exactly the same. The devil is in the dose. They did use a high amount. Also, there seems to be like a genetic component. So if these things run in the family, that's also so. But it's when they say a statement that says it is unknown if this will lead to thyroid cancer in humans, that statement is powerful to me, right? I mean, if I'm a parent, I'm going to go, unknown is unknown. It is not known. And we have these interventions and we have ways of, handling obesity that are known, and, there's no, it's a certainty that there's no side effects.
Yeah.
But again, it's a trade-off. It's like being obese carries its own side effects, right? Hypertension, shortened life, diabetes comes with a million complications. Like these are real issues. But we first have to know what we're up against with food, how to handle food properly, how to set up our environment for success. Yeah, this is a big challenge. That's why I get up in the morning. I try to figure this out every day, a new thing. I'm just hoping for like a major. I mean, there's a lot of people that are trying on this problem.
It's an epidemic.
It's the thing. It is a real epidemic. It really is. We need to take it seriously. So we'll see where this plays out.
Yeah.
We could talk more, on the subject of, medications and stuff again. Like we'll do more of a deep dive even, but I think this was a good overview today.
Well, I would really like to do another deep dive with you, especially the medications, and because we branched out a few ways. I'm like, that could be a whole thing. But just for anyone who comes across this every 2 weeks we'll be chatting with Lawrence about kids' health. If you, here you go, kidsgethealthy.com. If you haven't checked out our first 2 episodes, the very first one, you get to know Lawrence a little bit more and the programs that he's advocating, and then he's on the board and he helps start up. You can get to know him a little bit better, and we kind of chatted all over the place. And then please check out our New Year's Eve episode number 2, when we talked about vitamins and supplements for kids and kind of like your basic pantry, what you need in the pantry. I really enjoyed that conversation and it really kicked me into the new year well. And then this one, it's a heavy topic, childhood obesity, and just the agendas behind it and what have you. But there is high vibe, solution-based way of going about things, and having a nutrition specialist in your back pocket isn't a bad idea if you are struggling out there. But I thank you so much for always having such detailed research, and you really dive deep, and I appreciate that. So thank you for taking the time to do that and to share with us all this stuff. And any last minute things?
No, this was fun, and I love that we're doing this every 2 weeks. This is really, really great. And I mean, we could talk about, I mean, the supplement thing, I think can be an ongoing thing, depending on, because that's also something that we could talk about in terms of obesity and some natural alternatives to what's out there as well. So
that would be beautiful to get into. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, thank you again for joining. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. Please check out Lawrence August, kidsgethealthy.com. And you'll also find all the other links on there that he's
Yeah,
associated with.
kidsgethealthy.com. You can go there and you can book me through there. There's actually a link for like a free intro call that we could do to see if we'd be a good fit to work together. You know, yeah. So get at me. Lawrence at kidsgethealthy.com is the email, and I'm here for y'all.
Woohoo! Thank you, Lawrence. You have a good cozy day. The rain's pouring again. Stay safe out there.
You too. All right,
Thank you, everybody, very much. Stay